you were in charge, what are the main changes that you think would make the most difference?
I would deport half this country immediately. Honest to God, it sounds bad, and I get clipped on this every time, but I don't care. My cock, because none of these guys will ever debate me on it because they know that they're wrong and because they're treasonous, losers. I'm talking to all of you conservative cucks out there that have shows that are too scared to have challenging conversations. There has to be a dramatic re-engagement with how we view news and social media.
Adam22 and Destiny recently spoke about politics, which was an absolute mood, and I just had to make a video about it. They were with this other guy who I don't know who he is. I mean, I don't have beef with him, but I don't really have beef with Destiny or Adam22 either, but I kind of have a bone to pick with each of them. Do you like that little hippity hop reference I made for any Adam22 hip hop heads out there? I know Kendrick. Like, not personally, but I know of Kendrick, and I'll tell you what, I know he's way better than Drake, so don't at me. But anyway, this video isn't about hip-hop. Surprising, I know. This video is about Destiny gaslighting Adam22 about right-wing politics and saying a bunch of nonsense. So we're gonna go through that. Okay, but enough tomfoolery. Let's get into it. At least that serves as my intro, unless I make a second intro, in which case it'll go here. Destiny opens the dialogue by crapping on his debate with Jordan Peterson, as he is wont to do, starting with the first instance of nonsense.
Just people who can repeat the most asinine talking points over and over again. Like, I'm debating, with Jordan Peterson, the same shit that I would debate with my mom and dad. It's like, there's no more prep or intellectuality to it. And it just feels like so stupid. So that's like a frustrating thing, I think.
I'm just going to throw a few chapter titles from the JBP debate on screen. I don't know gigantism was a commonly repeated right-wing talking point. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about that except Jordan Peterson when he talked about it with Destiny. And if you saw the debate, Destiny had never heard of the idea either. There were many instances of novel discussion points in this debate that Destiny was utterly unprepared for. Not blaming him, the conversation could have gone in a million directions, so he can't prepare for everything. But Destiny had no response for the excess deaths past Corona or a lot of things. But yet he's saying these are the same conversations he has with his mom and dad. If Destiny's talking to his mom about command economies, negative externalities in free markets, and game theoretical approaches for tit for tat, then I'd ask him why his mom is so dull when I visit her every Tuesday night. Tell your mom to step up her intellectual riz, Destiny. I'm getting bored. Also, she says you don't call her enough. Call your mom. She cares about you an awful lot. Adam eventually chimes in on the election and appears very doomer-pilled, but Destiny is here to set him straight.
At this time, it's almost impossible for me to imagine the Democrats ever winning the presidency again. And it just feels like it's such a losing team to be associated with. And I don't really know that they have the self-actualization available to them to get past that.
I understand what you're saying. I will say that reality is constructed in the mind. And the feelings that you have are oftentimes feelings that you're supposed to be having because they're given to you by the people that are like kind of controlling the media environment. And conservatives are very, very, very good at writing media narratives and kind of telling you how you're supposed to feel about a given thing.
Yeah, those pesky right-wingers who definitely have a monopoly on mainstream media.
The election was pretty close. Like, people keep calling it like a blowout or a landslide because like on the night that it was called, there was a 15 million vote difference.
Right.
But I think that's down to a few million. It's like 49.4 versus 48.5%. Like, Trump doesn't even have over 50% of the popular vote anymore. Not to say that it wasn't a loss.
It's not like CNN's political director called it a sweeping victory or anything, or that tons of left-leaning and centrist media personalities have said the same thing. Now look, there's also a bunch of cope that's coming from the left too, from the likes of MSNBC and CNN, but the fact remains that the Republicans won the presidency, the Senate, and the House, and won the popular vote for the first time in like 20 years. And yeah, I guess Trump didn't even get 50% of the vote when the smoke cleared. He got 49.9% of the vote. Big difference, I guess. But if the Republicans winning all three branches of government and Trump getting 2 million more votes than Harris isn't a landslide victory, then I don't know what on earth Destiny would consider a landslide victory for the GOP. But we're swiftly transitioning from copium into retconning at record pace when Destiny and Adam somehow both claim that Kamala didn't run in an identitarian way.
Like, what is the proper strategy going forward when it feels like someone like Kamala went so out of her way to distance herself from identity politics and all the extremist leftist stuff that kind of permeates people's brains? Like, even just yesterday I was watching, I forget what her name is some black lady who got called into Congress, and Ted Cruz is yelling at her, and he's trying to get her to acknowledge why there are men's and women's sports, and she won't give like a straight up answer, because the straight up answer would be like boys are bigger and stronger than girls. And like, I feel like stuff like that just sticks to the brains of people who are undecided, and they are like, oh, well, this particular Democrat refuses to be logical or honest about this topic, so therefore that kind of colors my worldview of every Democrat, even though when you look at Kamala, it feels like she went very out of her way to not even bring up the fact that she was black or a woman.
Or what? Yeah, because if you remember the Hillary time, bro, breaking the glass ceiling and this, and like Kamala, I guess she was a black woman, but that was like never.
She's clearly cognizant of the fact that constantly talking about being a black woman is going to basically like close off a huge percentage of people to her, because identity politics just becomes less and less palatable to people.
Kamala Harris would literally code switch if she was talking to a black person. Exhibit A.
Oh, Madam VP Harris, I'm worried about the election. Women's reproductive rights are on the line. Our Supreme Court is on the line. Our basic freedoms are being tested, Madam VP. I know you've been traveling across the country. What are you hearing?
Yeah, girl, I'm out here in these streets. And let me tell you, you're right, Taraji. There is so much at stake in this moment. The majority of us believe in freedom and equality. But these extremists, as they say, they're not like us.
They not.
Adam can be gaslit more than a plasma TV if he wants, but I refuse to forget that Harris ran on both her race, half Indian, half black, remember, and her gender, mentioning both many, many times, and specifically running on issues affecting women and the black community, which cool, but don't try to act like she distanced herself from identitarianism.
I think when I looked at the things that happened over the last election and I look at the media environment, there's like two huge things that I think cause Republicans to function the way they do. One is they truly have no standards. There is no decorum. There are no like norms on the Republican side. They will go like as hard as they need to, and they have no accountability. And on the left, I think we had this kind of like a delusion that like, well, as long as we like respect our principles and values and we never, ever, ever, act mean and they go low and we go high, that's always going to be better.
I don't know why Destiny refuses to admit that both sides just kind of suck. Ben Shapiro is a principled person on the right, and I think Bernie Sanders is a principled person on the left, even if I disagree with those principles. But for most Republicans and most Democrats, principles are like Sam Smith's gender. That is to say, fluid. And I feel like everyone hates when I say that. Not the Sam Smith part, but the other part, because centrists are the most oppressed class in our society. But I'm not a centrist. Saying both sides suck shouldn't have to make you a dirty centrist, who deserve all the hate they get, by the way. Just kidding, kind of. But at least people like Dave Rubin and Tim Pool have the decency to at least claim to be principled, whereas Destiny thinks the whole they go low, we go high thing is just cucked, which is not good. Because if they go low, and then we go lower, and then they go even lower, then that's a definitional race to the bottom. And the thing about a race to the bottom is that even if you win, you end up in hell.
But one of the things you'll notice if you look at people going on podcasts, right, is that there's a whole ring of centrist and right-leaning podcasts. Well, Trump will go, he will never, ever be challenged ever on a single thing. He won't. They're not going to Trump is not going to Tim Pool and getting hard questions. Trump on Joe Rogan was a joke. Okay. Trump obviously on Fox or any right-wing environment is going to be insanely easy, right? Meanwhile, if a left-leaning person goes on to any of these environments, that's going to be a rough interview.
Yeah, Joe Rogan was not intended to be an adversarial debate. It was a conversation. People want more normal conversations with these politicians. Politics these days is vibes-based, baby, which at the end of the day is why Trump won. Anyone who tells you that Kamala had good vibes has the same level of intellectual dishonesty as someone who tells you Biden was mentally competent post-debate.
And in the left wing, you have this weird thing in the mainstream media where when Trump goes on, they're so like paranoid about being called like Trump derangement syndrome or whatever, that they're trying really hard to be like media fair, not called biased. And they're like letting Trump get away with so much insane shit. There was Trump gave the first interview to, I don't remember if it was ABC or NBC or CNN or whatever the fuck, but a few days ago, Trump gave his first interview. It was 45 minutes long. It was a fucking joke. It was, and even by the end of this interview, he was still calling this lady like mean to him, and she just let him lie with impunity for 45 minutes.
Lie with impunity? She asked him numerous follow-up questions and pushed him on many topics, disagreed with him many, many times. I mean, here she is asking about an election that happened 4 years ago.
For the sake of unifying this country, will you concede the 2020 election and turn the page on that chapter?
No. No, why would I do that? But let me just tell you, when you say the country is deeply divided.
Sir, Democrats have control of the White House now. They didn't in 2020. If they are going around stealing elections, why
when you
didn't
say
they do it
Democrats
this
have
time?
control, Now?
of the White House.
Yeah.
So why didn't they steal this election? Since they have more power now.
Because I think it was too big to rig.
So you won't.
Too big to rig.
To the people who say that you're now directing your Justice Department to investigate 2020, and they want to move on.
Very capable.
Is that
I think Pam is going to be great.
Precious resources.
By the way,
is that what you
just
want
so
them
know,
to do?
I don't know what Destiny expects. He's the new president. They have like an hour and a half. Does he want her to go full debate mode and spend 90 minutes debating the fake electorate scheme?
Meanwhile, like Kamala, I remember Kamala and Walz gave an interview, I think it was CNN, where they're like sitting at a table, and it's like question, she'll give a response, and then it's like 1, 2, or 3 follow-ups, like digging into like what Kamala or Walz is saying, and it's like these are tough interviews, and she has to give like policy-oriented, detailed answers, and then explanations for why, as the vice president, she hasn't done a thing yet. Meanwhile, Donald Trump goes out with impunity and can say anything.
I don't know what world we have to live in to think that Trump doesn't get asked hard-hitting interview questions and instead gets treated with the kid gloves by every journalist. Just look at the debate where he was fact-checked like 10 times versus Kamala 0 times. Hell, Trump was fact-checked because he said violent crime was on the rise. And when the moderator said, President Trump, as you know, the FBI says that overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. Trump said the FBI statistics were defrauding statements. And you know what? They frickin' were. Now look, you can say Trump was fact-checked more because he was wrong more, even though I heard in some of those liberal cities, even the women are eating pussy. But then that means these journalists make no qualms or quomos about pushing back against him.
Do you ever feel like, obviously the election went how it went, do you ever feel like there's like a vindictive Trump administration that might, you know, have a bunch of media personalities that he wants to get revenge on and stuff like that? Like, because you went so hard at it, and the fact that he got back in is like, you know, they're saying he's going to release all the guys that were arrested on January 6th, or around that, you know.
I mean, I feel like Trump himself is like a dog chasing cars. Like, I don't think Trump is very vindictive at all, actually. I think that Trump is very much like in the moment. Like, as soon as he got into office, he forgot about Hillary immediately. And I don't think it's because he's a good person. He was going to put politics behind him. I think it's just because he had new shit in front of his face.
He never locked her up. That would have been at least interesting to witness.
Yeah, he doesn't care once the thing is behind him. He doesn't care at all unless somebody's like with him in that moment in time. So
You think Trump forgot about Hillary? That was an actual Freudian slip there. Hillary. That was not in the script. Let's try that again. You think that Trump forgot about Hillary? That would be as hard as forgetting about Dre. Another hip-hop reference for those nojumper fans. See, I'm out here in these streets, just like you people. I mean, you, who are people that are equal to the other people, more equal. God, if I could forget about Hillary, my life would be like 2% better. Trump obviously chose not to go after Clinton, and we can't even get him credit for not going psycho mode. Now, maybe he just didn't want to end up as another number on the body count list. 4 out of 5 on Goodreads, by the way. In either sense of the phrase body count, though one shudders to think which option is more terrifying. But no, it has to be that the only reason he didn't lock her up is because she left his line of sight and he has worse object permanence than a Skyrim guard.
Must have been the wind.
The reality is, lock her up is just lock her room talk. And was never serious in the first place.
In order to understand Trump, you have to kind of like be willing to not take a huge percentage of what he says at face value. Like in the lead up to the election, he was saying, we are going to aggressively deport 20 million people. And then now that, what's his last name? Van Homan or whatever, the guy who's like put in charge of immigration or whatever, is kind of saying something that's much closer to an actual strategy that might really take place, which is like, we're going to deport a lot of people who are, you know, arrested for crimes and whatnot. They're going back to Mexico, but they're not going to be knocking on doors and like taking, you know, illegal immigrant grandmas and
maybe,
shipping them home.
But then what the f are we even doing? What are we voting on? Like, it's not like, because Trump is not saying these things as negotiating. He's just like saying random shit. And then what he can actually do ends up being something totally different.
See, Adam actually knows what's up. I mean, yes, he's making a terrifyingly Lovecraftian hybrid of J.D. Vance and Tom Homan.
Van Homan.
But he's right that you have to some degree, treat Trump like a deck of tarot cards and try to divine his true intentions. There's a reason the major arcana of the tarot are also called the Trump cards. That's just the reality of Trump. As Ben Shapiro said to Destiny during their debate.
And then you get to the rhetoric and you get to the stuff that Donald Trump says. And as I've said before, my view is that on Donald Trump's epitaph, on his gravestone, it will say Donald Trump. He said a lot of shit.
So a lot of it is negotiation. We might not like that Trump exaggerates and bloviates, but we can't deny that he does. We might not want to play the role of divination, but if we want to have accurate predictions of a Trump presidency, we better pull our decks out. I said decks with an E. Put that away.
Do you think Trump's going to go for a third term?
I mean, I didn't think he was going to run for this term, so I have no idea. I mean, I would say no because he'd be too old, but that was the exact same answer I gave for this term. He has lost a lot of energy. If you look at him now compared to 8 years ago, it's pretty crazy how. But I mean, he's getting old, yeah. So I mean, who knows? If he was younger, I would say absolutely yes. He would try to change it so he could.
For any left-leaning person listening to this, when you say this type of stuff, you sound like a crazy person. Trump is not going to repeal the 22nd Amendment. And even if he tried, it would be shut down 11-0 in the Supreme Court. I don't care how much he stacked it. And now I gotta hit you with that Lincoln Project ad. You made me do it.
Who won?
Trump. Trump won.
But I thought you could only be president 2 times.
Not anymore.
But anyway, Destiny realizes he hasn't been unhinged enough during this interview, so he quickly rectifies it.
You could press a button and he died. Would you do it?
Absolutely.
And then we move on to a hilariously ironic discussion about immigration.
We got this whole migrant thing. We got the small boats, if you know about the whole small boats thing.
I know about the migrant issue. Yeah,
What's that
because it's
mean?
like, it's sad because you guys were supposed to, like, Brexit was supposed to fix all of it. And it's
I
like,
know.
oh, it's like higher than ever. Like, we need workers so bad. And it's like,
What's the small boat thing?
So a bunch of migrants, mainly we're talking places like Syria, Libya, all these places that have been destabilized politically by foreign policy over the last, like, I don't know, 5-10 years or whatever. You've got all these migrants that have basically like traveled across Europe, but because this is the theory is like, because the UK has such a welcoming like welfare system and we have so many rights, we've got like nationalized healthcare. Basically these guys, there's like these criminal gangs that are organizing small boats to bring migrants from France to the UK, and they basically do channel crossings like in the middle of the night. They go on some like tiny little dinghies from France to the UK, and once they're in the UK they claim asylum and we can't get rid of them, and basically the government is housing them in like pretty luxurious hotels because we already have a housing crisis. There's like massive low housing stock, so like entire hotels are basically being shut down, like taken over by the government to house migrants, and then they're basically being put there, and like we have the equivalent of like DoorDash. It's just all straight migrants that are just like illegally driving mopeds, delivering food, working in this shadow economy, and we just can't get rid of them.
If you're an American, that probably sounds familiar. Sneaking into the country, claiming asylum, not an official port of entry, getting set up in nice hotels with a bunch of benefits, etc., etc. And yet Destiny just accepts this when it's said about Europe, but will fight to the death to say that America doesn't have an illegal immigration problem except for fixing the asylum process. When according to DHS's own reports, there has been 2 million gotaways since 2021. So 2 million people who we know of entered the country illegally and were not apprehended. In contrast, the UK has an estimated few 100,000 of undocumented residents in total. Even on a per capita basis, the US has like 3 times more undocumented immigrants than the UK does, but somehow it's a problem in Europe, but not a problem in the United States?
So it's funny when Americans are like, yeah, we have the same issues just like in the UK and just like from, you know, that Germany and all these people have with migrants.
We then dive into the wonderful world of trans issues, where Adam correctly points out that when Dems refuse to deny any insane stance, it's enough for people to lose faith in them.
Trump's on the same wave where it's like, you know, it's like such an irrelevant issue for most people, but it's also one where like if the Democrats seem like they're lying about that or like refusing to be honest about it, then that's kind of like enough for the average person to go on.
It triggers me so hard that like it's so obvious like what the game is.
Yeah.
And like I don't understand how conservatives like are so blind, or maybe they're all playing into it too. Because I saw the comments by Trump afterwards because they asked him about like I don't know if it was for swimmers or what, and Trump was like nobody in this country is trans. Like, let's not talk about this. Let's move on to something important. I'm like, motherfucker. What the
The problem with what Destiny says is that these things aren't in contradiction. Maintaining that the total number of trans people is small and also maintaining that we shouldn't let insane policies go through are not mutually exclusive stances. In fact, I'd argue one justifies the other, which is even seen in the next clip.
You were kind of offended or turned off by Sam Harris sort of like fully going for that narrative of right after the election, he put out a podcast basically saying, like, highlighting the trans issue as like this is the issue that if it didn't single-handedly lose the election for the Democrats, it at the very least was like, you know, massive.
I don't disagree with him that they were a big issue. I just wish that people would realize these are big issues because they make them big issues. And it's like I said, like Kamala Harris gets crucified for what was probably the correct answer, that the trans bathroom for prison inmates thing was basically just like, well, are you going to enforce like the existing laws? And she's like, yeah, whatever. If this is what the federal prison system demands and these are the laws, and this is what you do.
That kind of proves the whole point. We can't just allow any guy who decides he's a girl to be placed into a women's prison. That would be insane. I'm open to arguments that people who have been presenting as trans for a long time and are on HRT or have had surgeries or whatever could be put in some protective custody or something. Because yeah, I feel like if you put famous Chinese trans influencer Abby Wang, or Wangless, I don't know if they've had bottom surgery yet, in a male prison, it's going to be a bad time for Abby Wang. But we can't just allow for sweeping legislation that puts anyone who IDs as a woman into a female prison because of a tiny percent of the population of trans people that are taking medical steps to be women presenting. You know, roughly 1% of the population is trans. Roughly 22% of those trans people identify as women, and roughly half of those are taking hormones. It's hard to get an exact number because of how the surveys are done and the overlaps that occur statistically, but we're talking about like a half of a fifth of a percent here. I think it makes far more sense to treat each of these cases on a case-by-case basis of protective custody than it is to say that anyone who identifies as a woman on their driver's license goes to a female prison. But I'm talking way too much about trans people. Look, I made a whole video on trans people. Go watch my video, but finish this one first. And besides, don't leave now. We also have another clip about trans people anyway.
I never knew so many Republicans in the United States knew so much about women's boxing, okay? Women's Olympic boxing. They all became like so invested in this issue overnight. These are people who like, you know, 1 week prior were like the WNBA should be abolished, okay? And now, yeah, and you just have to like start these little itty bitty wedge issues and people just go fucking apeshit over and they eat it up like crazy. And they want to address the fact that a lot of it is just Russian fucking propaganda, and a lot of it is.
I'm not sure this was Russian propaganda. This was a legit issue of an athlete failing her gender test according to the International Boxing Association. Now, her family claims she's always been female, so this is like probably an intersex thing, but to my knowledge, we still don't know for sure. But what Destiny fails to realize is that conservatives care deeply about culture and a direction of society. So yeah, seeing what conservatives thought was a biological man beating up a biological woman was jarring. And seeing as trans women are officially allowed to compete in the Olympics as long as there wasn't something proving they had an unfair advantage besides merely their sex or gender, it wasn't exactly, to my mind, a crazy thing for conservatives to attach themselves to. Society is important, culture is important, and the direction we're heading in is, as you guessed it, also important. Those are just my thoughts, though, and I hope that gives a bit of insight into the inner workings of the conservative mind. It's not, oh, look, a random niche situation that doesn't affect my life at all. I'm going to die on that hill. It's more like, I care about the future and I care about what direction society is headed in, and I think we need to pump the brakes or change course before our entire society falls off a fucking cliff. Not to mention, for anyone who has a kid, this is not a rarefied issue. The population of trans people might be small, but every parent knows that the schools are full of this new understanding of gender being thrust upon young minds, hopefully not literally, and if you're on the left, you might think that's a good thing. But the point remains that this is not some minor issue. Well, it is a minor issue, but it's not a small issue. It's an issue that has a tangible effect on some people's lives, and especially people who have kids, and conservatives care about that type of stuff. But anyway, on to the next hot button topic, the Rona.
The thing that I'm obsessed with right now, that I shouldn't be, because I just keep reminding myself in my stream, none of this matters. It's all bullshit. It's all theater. I don't know if anybody believes anything anymore. Conservatives at this point, their conspiracies are so wacky. They have like all these conspiracies that they believe in, and like they all like even contradict each other, right? So like now, like if you ask one, like COVID was a Chinese bioweapon that leaked from a lab that they were making to f us. But also at the exact same time, like COVID is like this thing that isn't even real and isn't even like a bad illness. So what, is it like the worst bioweapon ever created? Or why did this hurt China more than us? Like this is like the dumbest bioweapon I've ever heard in my life.
This is just peak uncharitability. First, the vast majority of conservatives do not hold the opinion that it was an intentionally leaked bioweapon meant to destroy Western society. Also, most conservatives don't think Corona was nothing, and very few conservatives hold both of these things to be true at the same time. But then we quickly clip right through the map into false dichotomy territory where the two options are then made to be so extreme as to create a contradiction where none was present in the first place. For example, it could be the case that it was accidentally leaked from a lab, and it could also be the case that society overreacted with lockdowns and mandates. See what happens when you give actual views held by actual, real, living conservatives? All of a sudden, the contradiction goes away completely. Wow, what a surprise. So yeah, I guess there are probably a few Facebook whack jobs who hold extremely schizo takes and hold all of these conspiracies in their mind at once. I'm sure there are people on the left that are both blue and on, thinking 2024 was rigged against Harris, and think the Trump assassination attempt was set up by Trump himself, that he hired a random crook to use a DPMS Panther arm rifle to shoot him in the ear from 500 feet away as he turned his head at the last second. He might as well have just done a 360 no-scope while he was at it. And you know what I could do? I could just say, leftists don't live in the same reality. They think the assassination was staged, and they think the 2024 election was rigged, even though they blame Trump for doing exactly that in 2020. They have no principles, and they're the cancerous rot in our society. Jesus Christ. But while that might be fun to do and would give my brain some much desired dopamine, it's disingenuous. The reality is, a small minority of TikTok leftoids hold that view, and it's not representative of liberalism or progressivism writ large.
Or the idea that like January 6th was just a peaceful protest, like nothing bad even happened, but it was also like a Fedsurrection that federal officers instigated, and that's why there was so much violence. And it's like, there's so many of these theories. How can you believe in like all of these contradictory things at the same time? Like it's not even remotely, making sense. Yeah.
I mean, same with this one. Like Thomas Aquinas said after refusing to finish his Summa Theologica after an ecstatic vision of the divine, it seems to me nothing but straw. Men. This is just straw men forced to fight each other in a weird instance of scarecrow on scarecrow violence. I'd admit a lot of conservatives think J6 had some Fed influence, and a lot of them also argue, perhaps ironically so, that it was mostly peaceful. But there's a nuanced way to resolve this apparent contradiction. Most people at J6 weren't there to do violence and didn't engage in violence, and we know at least some federal agents were in the crowd. No contradiction here. It's only a contradiction if someone claims no violence took place, but also simultaneously holds that feds incited violence. But who says that? This is quixotic, and in the windmill fighting sense, not in the exceedingly idealistic sense.
And you've got like these Ukrainian military guys who are sitting in a ditch waiting to know if they're going to get new shells because an immigration bill has been tied to their foreign aid because of the Republican fucking party.
Oh, really? The Republicans were refusing to release Ukrainian aid unless it included a border bill. Oh, that one's actually true. Oh, well, that's not good. Let's just swiftly move on. Future me, remove this point from the video. Screw you, pass me. You're not my boss.
Makes no sense, Rex. It's like the Republicans, they're so anti this war in Ukraine. It's like, yo, you remember the Cold War? This is our chance to fuck Russia up. Like we could finish Russia if we really go hard and fix the Ukraine thing.
And that was the mainstream narrative at first, was like, oh, okay, Russia is all bad. This is our chance to really like show Russia what we're made of. And then like very quickly, because the right has to be contradictory towards everything that's like the mainstream narrative, it became David Sachs making it clear that like, no, actually this war is bullshit.
I mean, I'll agree there's some weird pro-Russia sentiment bubbling underneath the conservative movement, but that also could have to do with the fact that the U.S. has appropriated a whopping $183 billion to the Ukraine. Billion with a B. I'm not saying we shouldn't be spending that money. Look, I love me some hawkish foreign policy as much as the next neocon. I'm just saying that's a lot of money, which could be a possible answer to Adam's point here. Plus, how is this our opportunity to get Russia? This isn't a hot war between the U.S. and Russia. It's a proxy war that we're fighting with Benjamin and Rom and Apache attack helicopter money. Okay, those puns didn't work that well, but just pretend they did. But the point is, spending money just doesn't quite warm the cockles of the American heart as much as a good old-fashioned boots on the ground forever war, now does it? Then they start crapping on Tim Pool because he was found to be unknowingly taking Russian money through tenant media. Wait, let me fix that picture real quick. There we go.
I would have to do a huge public reckoning. I would have to, and even if I was innocent and not knowing, at the very least personally, like, okay, well, how is it that my content so cleanly aligns with Israel that they funnel money through me without me even realizing it? Yeah. How the did Tim Pool escape from that unscathed? That was like one day news cycle for him. And then he's like, whatever, oh, cool. And now he's like tweeting out like, oh, I bet the Krasensteins got paid for this tweet. And it's like, how shameless are you? Yeah. Like, you should actually be like, for fucking treason. That's an insane position.
Okay, so apparently Tim Pool deserves to be executed for treason. Look, I like making fun of Tim Pool as much as the next guy, but treason is a stretch here. Merrick Garland openly stated that the people being paid by tenant media were never told it was Russian money, and there's no evidence they did know it was Russian money. And they weren't paying him to do anything he wasn't already doing. They were paying him to do stuff which he was already doing that aligned with Russian stated goals, which in this case, according to the report, was amplifying domestic division in the United States. Welcome to, every political news show on YouTube. It's not like after Tim Pool started getting tenant money, he turned into RT or something. He was the same thing. I mean, my stances, on the other hand, are quite set in stone, and I'm a very principled person. No jesli bum je podsunali dostatić no rupli. My DMs are open, comrades. Also, Destiny is then saying that he'd have to question himself if his views were so closely aligned to Israel that they wanted to pay him. Destiny is far more pro-Israel than Tim Pool is pro-Russia. If Destiny wanted to become a Hasbara agent, he definitely fits the bill. He's probably done more for Israel than any other streamer has on YouTube. Me, on the other hand, again, lots of principles. Avaim halachim maspish chalim. My DMs are open, Javier.
And I've asked people on stage, and it's so crazy. I get booed for this. I'll be like, you don't trust anything that comes out of any of our intelligence agencies? And all the conservatives are like, yeah, no, fuck this. But you believe stuff that comes out of RT? You understand that this is like our enemy. Like, why would they be more credible then your own, like, these are your own American citizens work. Like, not every CIA, FBI guy is like fucking James Bond or Matt Damon or like, gee, it's crazy.
Again, maybe Destiny is just exposed to like the worst conservatives on the entire planet, but I've watched a lot of Ben Shapiro and Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh and Dave Rubin and Brett Cooper, and to a lesser extent Dave Smith and Tim Pool and Amala and Actual Justice Warrior. These are pretty representative of the average conservative talking head, and I don't think I've ever heard one of them say RT is a more trustworthy news source than the FBI, or that it's somehow more trustworthy than all of our federal institutions. Also, people distrust specific federal agencies in specific instances, which you could say is cherry picking, sure, but it's not like when some terror plot gets stopped by the CIA, a bunch of conservatives saying, I don't know, I'm not really sure if we can trust that this guy is guilty. I'm not even saying that the people who don't trust the feds in certain contexts are right. I mean, they are right, but I don't know if they're correct. But it just doesn't seem like a contradiction to say that in certain circumstances the DOJ can be weaponized, or that certain institutional actors can have their own biases. I mean, remember this case where the agent overseeing the Russiagate investigation was reassuring a top FBI lawyer he was having an affair with that they'd stop Trump from getting elected? Now, it's important to note that the reason we even have these texts in the first place is because the Justice Department released them. So yeah, anyone who says that you can't trust these institutions at all is clearly lost in the sauce. But that's not the common opinion on the right. A more common opinion is that you can't trust them fully, and that in specific instances there might be foul play afoot.
Right? You don't trust the federal officers, right? The Fedsurrection, the FBI. You don't trust these guys. Why the fuck would you trust the exact same branch, more or less, in the same part, to hire like 10,000 more immigrations and customs enforcement officers to deport illegal immigrants? These are the same guys that you said try to overthrow the country and get rid of Trump. Why would you 10x the size of this, the officers here to go? None of it makes sense. It just...
Well, again, Destiny is painting Republicans with way too broad of a brush. I don't think it's the case that the average conservative distrusts every single branch of government. Yeah, you see a lot of conspiracies about the DOJ and the FBI, but I don't see any conspiracies about ICE or DHS, which is who Trump would task to round up illegal immigrants. And I mean, you can't blame Trump for wanting to do this because he's afraid of Mexicans. They're Hispanic. But now we get into the topic of news, X, and Elon.
Bizarre to see Elon like celebrating the death of mainstream media or whatever, and claiming that X is where you should be getting your news, when like the best thing you can hope for is that the actual journalism done by places like New York Times or whatever will somehow like seep through to X, because obviously there's no original reporting being created on X for the most part. It's not like it's funding anybody doing like, hardcore journalism.
That's wild to me. There's tons of journalism that happens on X, Substack, and other social media sites. I'm assuming Adam is just unaware of this. Take Matt Taibbi, for example. He's an award-winning journalist who, ever since he left the Rolling Stone in 2020, has been doing journalism exclusively on X and Substack.
Here's a question. Do you think that Elon Musk is a compromised Russian asset?
I don't know. I think that you can explain everything that he does just by his own like ego and interests. That's another crazy thing. There's so many crazy things we can't even talk about. It doesn't matter. Like George Soros was supposed to be this like guy behind the scenes who was the craziest, like manipulating everything. Meanwhile, he's like this fucking far left progressive cuck who donates to like other countries. I wish he rigged elections for us. And then you've got Elon Musk, who buys one of our largest social media platforms, okay, as a South African immigrant, borrowing money from places like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and then steals the @America account for his support of Donald Trump, and then is doing stump speeches for him. And also, by the way, is censoring bad stories like that Iranian leak that apparently the Hunter Biden censorship was huge, even though Hunter wasn't running for office. But the Iranian thing that was directly implicated and was about Vance, that doesn't matter. It's just like, it's unbelievable to me.
How are we going to compare Elon Musk with George freaking Soros? George Soros' Open Society Foundation has given almost 20,000 grants to a wide variety of left-leaning social issues, including Planned Parenthood and BLM, and expressly tries to influence and shape the culture with donations to conform it to his image. He has his fingers in tons of aspects of culture. Now, you might think that's a good thing if you might like what George Soros is doing, but in comparison, Elon's foundation supports purely nonpartisan things. And yes, this is a real screenshot from his website. I don't know why it looks like this. I'd expect more from a billionaire tech mogul, personally. But until Elon starts using his wealth to shut down abortion clinics and bringing prayer back to school or something, he ain't a right-wing Soros, okay? So like Elon said when he discovered Twitter's bot problem was greater than it was presented, I'm just not buying it.
I mean, I kind of feel like I bought into the mainstream narratives about Elon, like, there was so many articles being written about how Elon was basically destroying Twitter when he bought it. And then you fast forward to now, and it feels like he definitely has destroyed it in the sense that it feels like a right-wing echo chamber, but at least like business-wise, it feels like he fired a load of employees, and the thing is basically running just as well as it used to before, granted with like less censorship, less oversight.
So Twitter had a bunch of censorship of right-leaning people. That censorship was relaxed and it became a right-wing echo chamber? When I hear that Twitter was just censoring the right-leaning people, and then when you stop doing that, that's what it naturally became. I guess if you're in a left-wing echo chamber and you move to an open field where anyone can speak their mind, it feels like a right-wing echo chamber by comparison. But how does Adam not realize that if something is a free speech platform that doesn't censor much, that's not an echo chamber, that's just a chamber?
Like, you know this, you should know this as a business owner, that anytime somebody does this vague bullshit of like, we're going to cut waste and fraud and go line by line and optimize, like, fuck, shut the fuck up, like, kill yourself. Like, if you're not gonna, like, if you don't have any actual suggestions for what the fuck you want to do.
Literally a minute ago, both Destiny and Adam agreed that Elon cut a huge amount of bloat from Twitter and it still ran fine. Do we seriously think that there isn't fat in a government that can be trimmed? I feel like that's something that surely the left and the right can come together on. But then we get to an incredibly ironic take.
There's a lot of stuff that, like, if it's working too, like, you can't really tell when it's working, and if you start to disassemble it, like, at some point you're like, oh shit, like, we needed this.
Like,
I think I'd title this clip, "A Liberal Finally Discovers Chesterton's Fence." So I agree with Destiny fully here. I just don't see this principle being applied to other areas very much. So yeah, that's why Elon needs to go line by line, because until we understand the consequences of government spending, we shouldn't cut government spending. But Destiny was angry when Elon said that he'd go line by line. Chesterton's fence? More like Chesterton's expense. And we gotta know what each expense does before we axe it.
Afuera, afuera, afuera. Ministerio de Obras Públicas. Afuera!
If you were in charge, what are the main changes that you think would make the most difference?
I would deport half this country immediately. Honest to God, it sounds bad, and I get clipped on this every fucking time, but I don't care. My fuck, because none of these guys will ever debate me on it, because they know that they're wrong, and because they're treasonous, fucking losers. I'm talking to all of you conservative cucks out there that have shows that are too scared to have challenging conversations. There has to be a dramatic re-engagement with how we view news and social media. It cannot be the case that you get these leeches, these parasites, these anti-patriotic, self-hating, self-loathing losers like Tim Pool or Benny Johnson or Tucker Carlson, all these guys that say freedom of speech, and they just use it to lie to everybody over and over and over again. They use it to lie with impunity and make millions of dollars doing it, while making every American like live in constant fear and not trust anything or anybody. And it's just, that's insane. That can't continue on. There has to be something to deal with that. And until that happens, you're I think.
First of all, conservative cucks, I wasn't going to mention this when the two of them started talking, but there's at least one thing both of these men have in common that I'll let you figure out. Second of all, is Destiny going into his anti-free speech arc? What is happening? Why no pushback? This is how this conversation just ends. Just going against free speech. See you later, liberalism. Nice knowing ya. Oh, you think sunlight was the best disinfectant? You're a cuck loser. You know what the best disinfectant is? Fire. Fire is the best disinfectant.